seaplanes in the air, hear thundering motors roar. It's the men who keep them flying with the U.S. Air Force. Hail to the squadron, hail to the wing, hail to all the airmen with whom we proudly sing. We've had a part in victory, for peace we steer our course. So raise your glasses, lift them high, keep your pledge to rule the sky. Hail to the U.S. Air Force. So raise your glasses, lift them high, keep your pledge to rule the sky. Hail to the U.S. Air
At Albuquerque on the occasion of our 50th anniversary of arriving at I have here a recording made by Jim Marsteller on his occasion this spring of visiting the Jones family at Wembley. Now, a lot of you know the Jones family, some of you don't, but young Ben Jones, he's about in his early 20s now. We first met him when we first started going over there as a group. We go as the kid on the bicycle. And J.G. Long got him interested in the group, and he's been over here a couple of times. And a lot of us have visited in the Jones home. And Mervyn Jones was responsible for that wonderful print we got of the old P-bar. And I'll just play this. It won't take but a minute.
Okay, here we are. Here we are. Where are we at? Mervyn. We're at the Ostrich in Castle Acres with our friends from England, Karen and myself with Ben Jones. Salute now. With Mervyn and Barbara. And we've had a wonderful time here this last week, and unbelievable. And we're going to give Mervyn the opportunity to say something to the 392nd that's coming up. Should I put it on pause, or can you think of something now? Okay. What was it, chips and potatoes we were having now? Yeah. Right, well, it's coming to it. Hello there, guys. Thank you very much for all your messages of support to Barbara. It's been really wonderful, and I'm sure that it's really helped her a lot. She's in great spirits and doing very well, and we're all looking forward to seeing you when you come over here for the 50th. Get your bookings in first, because the beds are going rapidly. The room rate is unchanged. We're charging the square root of 0, so how do you imagine the bookings are coming in? Here's Barbara. Anyway, lovely to talk to you.
What can I add to that? And just to say thanks very much for all your concerns that we've heard of via Jim and Karen, and also in the 392nd newsletter. We look forward immensely to meeting up with you again this year, and maybe sometime we'll get over there and meet up with you on your side of the Atlantic. Till June, best wishes to all of you, and many thanks again. I'm going to put you now through to Benjamin.
Hey, Benjamin. I'll see you all in May, because I'll be coming over, hopefully. So I'll see you all there. I'll give you a speech there. Okay, that's it for now.
A little explanation. Barbara Jones has come through a very difficult bout with cancer, and everybody thinks that she seems to be got whipped, which is a great relief to all of us. And Ben Jones, why he didn't get over here, he won a drawing for a free plane ticket, but it's not coming through yet. So maybe he'll get here for one of the reunions later on in the year. One other thing. You realize that there was a plaque given to Colonel Joe Bush the other night, and Joe's not able to travel, and as Virginia and I go back to Indiana, we're going to go through San Angelo and drop that off to him, and somebody, I think Colonel Gilbert, has prepared a card for everybody to sign. We're going to pass that to the audience, and just put your name, there's 3 cards in there, put your name on one or all of them, and so that Colonel Jones, Colonel Bush will know that we're all thinking about him. I'm the moderator, if you haven't gathered that already. I'm the moderator. I'm Jim Gore. I went overseas with the 578th as a supply officer. One day, several months after that, mission didn't get off the ground, or almost didn't get off the ground, because the trucks weren't there to haul the crew to the plane. And somebody at headquarters knew that I had experience as an enlisted man, as a sergeant in transportation, so they said, we want you down there, and we want those trucks there to get those crews out of those planes. So I said, yes, sir, I understand that. So that's how I had to be transportation officer for the 392nd. I want to introduce my, my civilian occupation. I'm a civilian soldier. I stayed in for the duration, and I left, and then I was a student for a while, and then I've been a real estate broker ever since in Frankfort, Indiana. And I'm still active. Competitors don't always say that. On my right here, the first panelist is Lieutenant Charles Dye, 1825th Ordnance Company. He was station ammunition officer. He retired from the Air Force Reserve as Lieutenant Colonel, and he is a retired lawyer. The next one is Master Sergeant Ernie Barber, Ernest M. Barber, crew chief in the 578th. He's a retired postal worker. The next one is Sergeant Gil Bambauer, flying equipment, a retired manufacturing executive. And Gil, I'm going to embarrass you. This is the man that really helped this group together in those years when nobody else was paying any attention, in the 60s and the 70s. So, Gil Bambauer, we salute you for that. And the next man is Tech Sergeant Norman Mello, flight engineer on the number 1 crew of the 578th Squadron, the Cliff Edwards crew, and he's a retired school teacher. Number 5 is Captain Barney Glettler, the flying control officer. He retired as Colonel of the Air Force, 2nd career with the AT&T, 3rd career as a fighting officer in Traverse City, Michigan. And that's now, the following statistics and facts, in quotation marks, are not guaranteed to accuracy. They came from my memory and just a little bit of research we've done. But I'd like to give an overview of kind of what the 392nd was all about administratively at Wendell. First, the 392nd Bombardment Group had a headquarters with approximately 50 officers and enlisted men and 4 squadrons, 576, 577, 578, 579. In headquarters, the commander was Colonel Irvin Rendell. The air exec was Lieutenant Colonel Warren Johnson, and the ground exec was Lieutenant Colonel Joe Bush. In headquarters, divided up into 4 sections, Army style. S1, personnel, headed by the adjutant, who was Major Jack Fritchie. The intelligent S2 was headed by Major Cayley. Major Cayley was maybe 35 or 40, and we all thought he was pretty old. S3, the operations was headed by Captain, later Lieutenant Colonel Lawrence Gilbert. And S4 was headed by Major Vance Cornelius in maintenance and Captain Harold Finch in supply. Besides the bomb group, there were a whole galaxy of support organizations. And they were the 1825th Ordnance, Captain Jack Tufel, is that right? The 465th Sub-Depot, commanded by Colonel James Wall. The Quartermaster Detachment, they were responsible for food, clothing, paper clips, things like that. Captain George Cadwallader. I've been trying to find George, and he can't find him. Anybody knows where he is, I'd like for you Tell me about it. There was a chemical warfare detachment, there was a postal unit, there was an MP unit, Captain Peter Constance, little fellow. There was a station hospital, and last but not least, there was American Red Cross, headed by Bertie Schmidt-Larry. We were discussing the strength. We thought there were usually about 3,500 men on the station at any one time. About 400 or 500 in the squadrons, about 1,000 or so in all those support groups. By the way, those support squadrons were all gathered together toward the end and made a special group, a service group. And Colonel Wall commanded that. That was rather late. That was after early 45, if I remember right. I said the other day, put bombs on the target. That's what we're there for. And it matters whether you cook, or a truck driver, or a clerk, whatever you were there to get those bombs on, help get those bombs on that target. So there was a lot to do to make the group a force that would get that done. We had to feed, clothe the men, and we had to do, there were a lot of humdrum daily tasks to be performed. But the main thing was to launch the mission, recover the mission, and get that mission ready to go, bombed up, serviced up, planes full of gas, airplane, engines turning over, ready to go. And so I think we'll start with about how that developed. And I'll start with my little part of it, the transportation part of it. The alert came in from the division in the group operations. The group operations, on the battle orders and on the advice of the battle orders, they got started organizing how many aircraft, which crews. The squadrons got in on that. But anyway, they made up a little formation plan that Bob Vickers uses a lot in his book. With this sheet with the little T's with the airplane number and the crew on it, and that got passed around to the people who needed it. Well, transportation got one of those, and we would assign one truck to two crews, the crew being on adjoining or nearby hard stand, and that was that truck's responsibility to get that crew out to the airplane. Sometimes it took a couple of trips because the gunners sometimes would read ahead or differently from the navigators and the others. And then they also, sometimes it was their sad responsibility to wait and be there at the hard stand when that airplane came back and get the crews back in again. That's kind of a side on that. I forgot my side. Major Holland, the group surgeon, kind of an old Army kind of a guy, great on regulations, and great on things being done just right. When the crew would come in from the field, off the hard stands, sitting on the tailgate with the chains, holding the tailgate up, like that, he just give me hell for that. He says, you know what could happen if one of those chains would break and that gunner or that man sitting on that tailgate would drop down and they would break his back. So it was my job to go out and tell these flying personnel who had just come in from a mission at 20,000 feet, being shot at with flak and fighters, and now boys, you got to be careful about riding this truck back there. Well, they were going to listen to it. I hadn't listened to all of them. So, since I've explained what transportation did to get this mission started, I think I'll jump to Charlie Dye, the station ammunition officer. And Charlie, what was it necessary to get the bombs on the planes?
First, let me start off with a little background information. During my enlisted days, I was an instructor at the Ordnance School at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. And there we impressed on all the students that Ordnance has the initial responsibility or everything that moves, shoots, or explodes. So from there, we took our initial responsibility pretty seriously. We were fortunate in that at Wendling we had a automatic supply. But first, let me give you an idea of our ordnance setup. We had on our base the 1825th Ordnance Supply and Maintenance Company Aviation. Each squadron had an ordnance section, and these were the people that were responsible for, well, all of the responsibility, initial responsibility for the bombs, the ammunitions, the very pistols, and even down to your shotgun shells that so many requisitioned to use to shoot the Queen's pheasants, I guess. Anyway, we had an automatic supply, which was worked very well for us, in that if a mission today dropped 200 500-pound bombs, then the order went in from wing headquarters to supply the 392nd with an additional supply of 200 500-pound bombs, and we got on the list. There was initially, the supply route was long and tedious in that they were bringing the bombs by ships over to the ports, and from the ports they were loaded onto the trucks, and the trucks would bring them in to our bases. Sometimes we'd get 5 or 6 trucks, sometimes we'd get 18 or 20 trucks loaded with 500-pound bombs or 1,000-pound bombs or whatever it is. The hassle came in when the convoy was in there and we were trying to load out a mission where we'd have 20 or 30 or more trucks lining these small English roads, and then the ordnance crews were trying to get bombs to take out. We inspected individually every bomb that came into the bomb storage area. We fondly refer to it as the bomb dump. So every bomb that came in, we inspected it to make sure the threads for the nose and tail fuse, the fins were all right, so that there would be no problem of inserting the fuse or the tail fin. We also had to make sure that the lugs were not bent. They were in good shape because they'd just come across on the boat. And we had to check to make sure that none of the explosive was exuding from any of the welds or whatever. So each bomb was individually inspected at least once. If it had been in storage and it got down on the bottom part of the rack and sat there for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, and we would again inspect it. Let me give you just a brief word picture of our bomb storage area so you can get a picture of how the mission went off. As you came into the bomb dump, we had our office and barracks on the right side. On the left side was the fuse hut, the Nissen hut, where we stored the fuses. Each squadron had their own revetment, which consisted of 2 to 4 different bays. And we stored in those bays the different sizes bombs. The 500s, the 1000s, the 250s, the 260 frag bombs, everything except the 100-pounders, the 2,000-pounders, and the chemical bombs. The 2,000-pounders were so big that we stored them on the side of the road where we could get at them with a crane. The chemical bombs we had to keep away from that particular area. And the 100-pound bombs were so small and we used so many on a mission that we stored those along the road or any field area that we had available to us. When the battle order would come in, it would be called into the bomb dump, giving us the number of aircraft that each squadron would fly, the fuse settings that were to go into each of the bombs, the nose fuse and the tail fuse. Probably about 30 minutes after this order or this telephone call came in, the squadron ordnance would start coming in with their bomb service trucks and trailers. Well, these trailers were really designed to hold 6 or 8 500-pound bombs. I guess initially that's what the old B-17 would carry. They hadn't counted on the B-24. So these people were loading 12 and 14 500-pound bombs so they wouldn't have to make so many trips into the bomb dump. But each squadron would go to their own revetment, load their bomb service trailers, and pull out, stop at the office, and we would check them to see how many bombs they had so we could keep a record of that. The fuse people, in the meantime, soon as they got the call, they went into the fuse hut and started to set up the fuses. We set the settings on the nose or tail fuse, whether it was instantaneous or a tenth. That's the two settings we had on the nose fuse. We would select the detonators for the tail fuse as to the timing. If it was 0.025 or whatever it was, we would assemble those along with the arming wires. As soon as the bomb service truck from the squadron was checked out of the office, and we gave them the number of fuses for the bombs that they had. If they had 12 or 14 or whatever on there, we'd give them their fuses and arming wire. They would go out to their particular airplane and station those bombs at the airplane. They wouldn't put them on until they got the word from Ernie or someone in charge of the airplane that they were ready to put the bombs on. Of course, then the fuses weren't inserted until, well, they waited as long as possible to insert the fuse in the event the airplane wasn't going to take off or there was something wrong and we had to remove the bombs. If there was an abort, then we had to recover those bombs. They were brought back into the bomb storage area, the bomb dump, and we again made an inspection before we put them back into the revetments, just to make certain that nothing had gone wrong. There wasn't any bent lugs or whatever on those particular bombs. If an airplane, unfortunately, we had some that crashed on takeoff, then it was our job to go out with whatever equipment we needed and recover those bombs. We brought them back into the bomb dump and again made an inspection before they were put back into storage. Thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Charlie. Ernie Barber, crew chief. I wouldn't call him a typical crew chief because he was anything but a typical crew chief. But Ernie, what did it take to get an airplane ready to take off?
Well, we didn't have to worry about waking up because armament and all of them would come out with the trucks and start unloading and all and wake us up. We had our shacks on the line. We were right there at the plane. But as soon as we got up, the first thing we did was fix us a big black cup of coffee. And then we'd get out to the planes. Usually the first thing we did was pull the props through. And if it was cold weather, it might take two of us to pull it through. Otherwise, one would have each engine to pull through. Then we'd walk around, make sure that nothing had happened during the night, check it visually outside. And usually two of us would get in the cockpit. We'd run through all of the movements of the ailerons, elevators, rudders, make sure they were all in operation. Check our fuel transfer valves, make sure that they were, and then we'd, if it was a frosty morning, we'd have to get up there with our mops and mop the wings with kill frost. And that was always a challenge because if you happened to step where the frost was, the next thing you had to do was climb back up on the airplane. After we get all of the outside and the inside checked out, make sure then we start pre-flight. And we'd pre-flight the engines and warm them up and then run them up and make sure we had the right manifold pressure and everything and shut it down, and then we sat down and waited on the crews. Usually the bomb loads would come in and they'd go ahead and load up. And then the radio men, the ground radio men would come in and check out that. And the turret men would come in and check those out. And after everything is ready to go, then the crews would come in. And the first thing I'd have to do was answer to the pilot, or if he didn't feel like it, his co-pilot. And one of them would take a visual walk around the plane. Then we'd just back off and wait for the crew to get ready. We used to be a little chummy with the air crews, but I lost 5 airplanes, and after the second one I learned to just be businesslike with them. We didn't try to get too chummy with them, because it was just like losing one of the family when you lost one. We followed them out, didn't follow them out, but we watched them out to the line. They'd sit out there in long lines, wait for takeoff, and then we sat down and took our rest while they were on the mission. And then when the time come for them to come back, that's when we sat down with our hearts in our throats, waiting and watching those planes come back and watching the slots where we knew our plane would be. And if you ever had one come back and your plane didn't show up, you can imagine what a feeling it was. Otherwise, we spent a little time in the NCO club, which finally turned out to be the Aero Club. And if we knew that we were on stand down, well, we had a little bit of more beer than we usually would have, or something of that sort. But there was times when we have engine shot out, or a lot of patching to do, or we'd have superchargers out of things, and we'd be up all night long getting those ready, and a lot of times you wouldn't have them ready, but most of the time we try to have them ready for the next morning's flight. They usually fuel them up before, or in the evenings after they come back, because you couldn't wait till fuel up all of those planes. You had, what, about 2,750 gallons of gas. Unless it was a short run, they wouldn't top it off. But I think we had a special amount we put in all of them. And then if it was an extra long run, we might have to cap them off or something.
Ernie, before you joined the 392nd, have I seen a picture of you in some distinguished company at Willow Run? Henry
I went
Ford and Charles Lindbergh.
Went to Ford Bomber Plant, Willow Run. It was the first 25 of us to get there. And at that time, they didn't have any place for us but a tent city that used to be a little farm community for Henry Ford's young boys. And we spent 5 weeks there training. And during that time, Henry Ford and his business agent, Bennett, I believe it was, and Charles Lindbergh came to visit us with to build our morale up. We needed it built up with all those women in that area. You can imagine 25 soldiers in a plant as big as the Willow Run was, and 99% of them were women.
Ernie, say again how old you were at the time.
How old I was? I believe I was about 20 then.
Probably up to the challenge. What about those line checks, Ernie?
Well, we started off, we used a canvas type that was made to work in the wet weather, something that would go around the engines. We never put them around the engine. We always had one on the line, and we'd stay in it and go in and out. And then as the bombs boxes became available on these anti-personnel bombs and things, they were sealed in tin and then salted, if I remember right, to make them weatherproof coming overseas and all. We tear those apart. We had squares of boards for spacers. That was our shingles. We used tin for the roof, shingles for the walls, and we built shacks out there. My shack was called the old barber shop. We confiscated bricks around the place and had us a built-in brick fireplace inside, 9 feet small. We had one Victrola and one record. Old Kentucky Bays was the record. We used to have a few of the crew would come out and share our coffee and listen to our record with us. On my particular one, it was muddy as it could be. We stole some rocks, rocked in the front yard, and then we decided we'd put a picket fence around it. So we had the prettiest one in the South.
Gil Bambauer, what was necessary down at the equipment rooms to get a mission ready to go?
Of course, there was always a lot of activity to get a mission off. I'd like to relate one story, if I may. At the very beginning, I believe it was the very first mission, just after I joined the group equipment section, Captain Roberts, at that time was Lieutenant Roberts, he came into my office and he says, we have a bit of a problem. I said, yes sir, what is it? He said, we're 50 parachutes short getting this mission off tomorrow morning. I said, can we find some other base, or can we find, he said, I've located them, but we have to take you and somebody else by a 4x4 and pick up those chutes at Watton, I believe was the name of the air depot. Now somebody else mentioned how much fun it was to drive a truck or any vehicle around England, because they took all the signs down and they wouldn't tell you where any place was. You just had to know where you were going. And so I finally got over to transportation, and they asked me if I had an operator's permit, and I said yes. It was from Davis Monthan Air Force Base as a civilian, not cleat-track, but tugs and jeeps and that type of thing. And I don't know whether it was Jim Gore or his predecessor, but someone was there and they said, well, let's get you in a jeep and see if you can drive a jeep. Heck of a difference than a 4x4. So this is yet to come. I have to still drive my first 4x4. So I drove the jeep around the lot a little bit, and they said, okay, I gave them a ticket. Now we have to find another guy on the base, and transportation was all busy. So Captain Roberts, or I'll call him Captain, he was lieutenant at the time, he said, now, do you remember there was a young man in the welding shop that had a permit in Yuma? I said, yeah, I remember him. And he said, well, why don't you go down there and see if he'll go with you, and I'll call his commander and get him cleared. So the two of us finally left the base about, I'd say 11 o'clock in the morning, maybe 12, after we had lunch. And it's a 36-mile trip to Watton, about 36 by ground. We made 150 miles before we got there. And I'm telling you, we got there late in the afternoon, because you're not making much time on those highways and byways in England. So we got to the base finally by, luckily, running into a couple of MPs. Now, can you imagine two young bucks with just barely operating permits stopping two MPs and saying, hey, we're lost? We have to get to a certain place, and those poor guys, they said, follow us. Right into the base we went. So that was the first trip. I remember we still had to get back to Winley. After we load up, it was chow time. We had a meal there. They would let us get on the road without feeding us. And we started back, and it was getting dark before we got back to the base. We had one instance where there was a divider in the road. You could go one way and maybe a blink and then maybe a right or something. So we didn't remember how we got to that point coming in. So we asked the gentleman who was standing on the side of the road, and we're halfway back to Winling by this time. Now we're 15, maybe 18 miles away from the base. And he got to scratching his head, and he said, I don't think you can get there from here. First time I heard it. Well, we finally did get back to the station. Now it's after dark. Get those chutes over to the parachute shop and have them inspected. Yes, sir. So we went to the parachute shop. Lo and behold, of course, course, when chutes are in storage, they are not necessarily packed. Not a one was packed. So of course we had to get them out of their own pack, and hang them up in the tire, and shake them and a couple times, and get them on. Called out every rigger on the base. All 4 squadrons sent their riggers down. Now this was getting pretty close to, I'd say, 11, 12 o'clock at night, and they got those chutes dried, and some of them were a little moist. And you can't do that. You can't fold one chute. You do, you're jeopardizing somebody's life. So they were all, excuse me, we got them folded, redistributed to the grind rooms where they were required to be. So many to the 577, 79, and then the 76 and 78. And we made the mission. So I call it the mission before the big one.
Gil, can I ask you a question? Sure. Were they all chest suits?
They were all quick disconnect chest suits.
All chest.
Yeah. And by the way, there was harnesses that all had to be, well, the harnesses were left there, of course, to be adjusted to the ones who had to have the shoes.
But you know, they gave us a choice. We could have a back suit or a chest suit. You couldn't offer that to everybody this time.
That's right. That is right. There was a shortage. Now, I never knew the reason why there was a shortage of chutes until a long time later. Well, they said, well, these crews didn't fly their planes over, and when the planes came in from, like a ferry plane or something, over from Ireland or Northern England, that perhaps the ferry crew just brought it in, and then they went back on transport or something. So we had the planes, and sometimes for the crews, we didn't have all the chutes.
There was a problem also on the base, and I got involved in it because sometimes there'd be a shortage of chutes just before a mission, and I had to go around to the aircraft, and some of the crews would have 2 chutes apiece. And also on flak suits. If I got my flak suit last, sometimes there wasn't a flak suit. And I'd find crews that had flak suits under the pilot seat, or the co-pilot seat, stuffed all over the aircraft. Well, we finally got that straightened out. I don't know if you recall that.
I've always wanted,
Say your name. Say your name.
Dick Hoffman. I've always wanted 579, and I would personally like to thank whoever the rigger was that put my chute together. Because I had to use it.
There might be a gentleman out in the viewing audience here who would know. Is Will Finger here? He was the sergeant in charge there. Do you happen to know the 579th men who were riggers? You might say there's 5, and he can thank all 5 of them, you know.
They changed quite a bit during the time we was over there.
Right.
Bill Holland was in charge of the driving room for the 79 originally, then he transferred out, and they had 3 or 4 after.
Well, it would be pretty hard probably to find him, but we're thanking him anyway.
Amen.
Let me add something. I'm Charlie Taylor with the 576. I was a supply officer over there, and he was talking about the shortage of parachutes. When it got down there in December there, we were almost blue, flying suits, underwear. That was the limiting factor of how many crews you could put up, is how many of those you had on hand at one time.
That's right. Yes, I remember that. You're right.
Arnold W. 570.
579.
579.
But my question was, did you get any statistics on when those chutes didn't work?
Arnold, I can tell you, I personally never received one.
I was doing a story.
Anyway, it worked for me, but I did one.
Bob Tuchel, 579. I've always wondered who was in charge of all those wonderful electric suits that we had.
let me tell you what I think about the two-piece electric suit. It was a beautiful piece of garbine material and had twin circuits, and we were one of the first operational groups in England that was equipped with the two-piece, I forget the F2 or the F1, what do they call it, but it was a beautiful piece of equipment. And I think you guys should enjoy that over the other underwear that you had to wear.
Mr. Bill Blanche.
578. I gotta say amen to those electric flying suits, those two-piece. They were such a vast improvement over that blue underwear. We lost one of our gunners while he was grounded because on an early mission he was frostbitten all over his feet and hands with those things. But I know they were just fantastic. For a navigator that had to stand 8 to 10 hours flying backwards. Those shoes were even comfortable.
Oh yes.
And they even confused Patton when we landed on a mission coming back to Mont-de-Marsan. He didn't know who the hell we were. Dressed in those green suits, and black shoes. They were great.
Thank you.
David Squadron?
Bert Cross, 576. I just wanted to ask Gil, when did you get those two-piece? I never saw one of those.
You know, I think it
turned out on mine a couple of times.
I think it was in early '44 or late '43, because we issued them right out of our office there, right across from 578, 576 Grand Room, ready rooms.
Speaking of flak suits, J.D. and I know a certain bombardier in such and such a squadron who had an extra supply of flak suits, and he built himself a little fort around his nose on his station with those flak suits. He smoked a cigar, if you know what I'm talking.
We made one mission with the sheepskin outfit. I like to throw it to them.
Well, that wasn't electrical. That was supposed to be worn over the electrical.
And after that, we got into electric suits. And they were a lifesaver, I'll tell you. Goes out of the waist gun. You open the window and put it up and stuck your gun out there, and it was cold.
You didn't give us your Sergeant LeBlue and the 578 and Sergeant Mello's crew. Arnold?
I want to report the opposite of these endorsements of the electric suit. I didn't think they were reliable, and if you ever had one shorted out on you, you knew why.
Well, you usually shorted out here in the elbow.
Right here, right there.
But I keep freezing to death, so I guarantee you.
Charlie Taylor, 576.
On those blue suits, they were in series. If you lost one glove, you lost the other. They finally found out where they could bypass them and get one of them back working again. But that was the trouble in here and here and in
the flex points.
But that's where they could bypass them. Why?
I think we can draw conclusions from that. There was a lot of trial and error right in that moment. I can tell you another story about the leather flying clothes, the sheepskin lined flying clothes. We got an order once to go down to Southern England and pick up a 1.5 ton personnel carrier. And since I was transportation officer, I thought that'd be something that he ought to do to be sure that that truck got back. So I went down to get it. And it was in the middle of winter, and you know those cabs are open. So we got us, the driver and I drew one of those suits to drive down there and get it. Well, on the way, this is the invasion was starting to build up. And on the way, we stopped by an armored unit. And they hadn't seen anything like that. And don't think the Air Corps didn't take a lot of razzing for having being the country club of the Army. Out of those suits. Well, how are we doing on time? Who's timing me? Anybody?
You got some to go.
I think the next man on the program here is Tech Sergeant Norman Mello. Norman, what did the air crew have to do after you got out the airplane?
Well, the first thing we do is load our guns, get our guns set up, and then I would get out and do a walk around with the crew chief. My crew chief was Sergeant Arthur Knight, one of the best. We always had that plane in tip-top shape. That plane never ever turned back in all of its mission. It went every time. I had to get out and kick the tires. That was my main job, to kick those tires first thing in the morning, because I knew the plane was in shape, but Art and I always did our walk around. After he walked around with the pilot and co-pilot, he walked around with me. I spent a lot of time out of that airplane. I was flight personnel, but I had gone through engineering school and knew that airplane inside out. And anything major that had to be done to that airplane, I was on the spot and worked with them. And Art really took care of us. I don't know what else I can add to it. I, being a flight personnel, I wasn't out there as much as those guys were, but you had a much better shack out there than we did. Our shack wasn't near as nice as yours, but it was comfortable. Kept the boys dry out there during the winter anyway. Questions?
Norm, did you have to clean your guns after the mission?
Always, yeah, that was a big thing, clean those guns, but usually after debriefing. We'd go back out to the plane after debriefing and get the guns out and clean them. And then our plane flew about once a month. We were lead crew and we only led when we were leading division. And so we'd have to go out at least once a week and clean those guns again. We wore them out cleaning them.
The airplane that Norm Mellon was talking about is the Ford's Folly. That somebody has seen pictures of it in magazines, and I think there's even a model airplane made out early on. That plane was the first B-24H off of Henry Ford's assembly line. It had the lowest number, 466. It was the first plane out, and we decided to name it Ford's Folly. We wrote a letter to Ford Motor Company, and they wrote back to us. It's got quite a write-up at the Ford Willow Run plant. They were honored by us naming it Ford's Folly. Our belly turret gunner was the guy that named that. We came up with several different names, but Gene Hill fought hard for Ford's Folly, and I'm glad he did. Yes, sir.
I'm Jim Harris, 578. One time when my plane was down, they assigned me to Ford's Folly, and I don't remember the pilot, but he met me out there and he says, if you scratch this plane, buddy, you're in trouble.
That plane was not his. That plane belonged to Arthur Knight. We had to check that plane out from Arthur Knight.
Harris, stand up here with the man. I need to get your picture.
Who's talking?
I'm sorry, I'm short.
That was a big thing. We always had to check that plane out from Art, and Art told us the same thing, don't scratch it. And then one of my gunners shot the tail fin out of it one time. We won't talk about that.
More than once.
What you do, we know.
You had a boat you pulled
Stand
up.
up. Stand up so you picture.
You had a boat that, when you shoved your gun out the whistle, you had a boat pulled up and turned and put a little notch, like a latch on the door. Somehow or other I didn't latch it good. And I was firing at the Messerschmitts, and that boat come loose and it pushed me back in the plane, swung around, and I put a hole through the de-icer. Might give me hell for that.
What was his name?
LeBlue.
LeBlue.
Leon LeBlue.
Thank you, sir.
Our tail gunner is here someplace. I don't see it. We didn't make it. That was George, the guy. Oh, there's George right there.
George Bell.
Our tail gunner. He just got to this meeting. He spent most of his time in the hospital.
Yeah, I rode way back on the back end.
Well, we got the airplanes serviced and loaded and ready to go. Now we got to get them off the ground, and that was Barney Guttler's job.
Well, you can see on the tail end, somebody has to be at the end. And we were down there to get you off and get you back on the ground. I gotta apologize for Barbara and Norm and myself because we were down on the firing line. We were down where the action was. We didn't come dressed this morning as our office executives next to us. But make sure everybody understands what flying control is. Of course, that's all the fellows that were over there do. And back in the States here, it was air traffic control. Air traffic control on an air base was handled by the air base. When the bomb groups came over to England, of course, they had no air traffic control over there. So even with the B-17s, B-24s, and the others, we had to set up an organization to handle that function. I went over with the 44th in August of 42 and ended up as an armament officer in the 68th Squadron. And we had 2 officers there, and when they wanted somebody to go up and pick up the tower function, having flown Piper Cubs and having been a radio ham operator, I got the job and stayed there at the 44th at Shipton until they needed somebody at Wendling. So I volunteered to go over to Wendling because I was working for a major at Shipton. So that's how I ended up in the 392nd. And of course, we went down and participated in the morning briefings and primarily to tell the crews, the pilots, where there were obstructions on the taxiways and also what to look out for as far as the runway was concerned. And most of our instructions would come down from flying control, which was headquarters, which was the 2nd Air Division, and we would pass that information on at the briefings. After or during takeoff, we would have to keep the wing or the group notified of what aircraft did not get off. We did once in a while had some aircraft that never got, even though he was on a flight plan, he didn't get off. We'd have to tell him which ones were aborting. We had to give the reasons. And some of the other functions that we did up there in the control tower, I had usually four officers with me and about 25 enlisted air traffic controllers. We, of course, took all the alerts from the air warning people, and that is the information that was passed over the tannoy system to let you know whether to get dressed and go out and get in the shelter and like that. We, of course, were in constant touch with the 2nd Air Division with respect to what was happening, of any messages that they would get with regard to over the target area and coming back. And of course, usually about the time the aircraft were coming back, of course, Colonel Randall was there, Colonel Gilbert, and a flock of other people, and we enjoyed having them there. And we would, of course, let the hospital know if we had anybody that reported somebody hurt on the aircraft so that they would be ready when they landed. We, of course, had the other responsibility if the weather closed in, which it did very frequently. We had to put out the flare pots, which is what you use down in Florida to keep the fruit from freezing. And that was quite a job to run up and down the runway lighting these flare pots. And then also at the end of the runway we had a little van there in which an air traffic controller sat in there, both with a green light if we needed and lost communications, and also where we would fire the flares in the air to help the pilots find the runway when they come back. I don't have all of this information that we logged over there with me, so I'm not quite prepared as Joe was yesterday to give you some details, but I know several of the pilots were superb in, if they had trouble landing. I remember one knew he had trouble, and of course he immediately after slowing down, he pulled off into the grass area so that he did not hold up anybody behind them. For the women, if you think some of these highways out here are crowded with automobiles, the air over there where we had 3 and 4 runways or airports within 5 miles of each other was probably 50, 60 airplanes flying around. We were lucky that we did not have more accidents than we had. I have one, in my total military career, I got out after the war and then came back in the end of 47. In my total military career, I can only remember 3 times that I was really chewed out by somebody, even once as a full colonel. But this happened there at Wendling. One night, we usually went to bed early because we would get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. 3 or 4, depending on when the briefing was. Colonel Johnson called me up in the Quonset. We lived right up there by the tower. He called me up. We'd happened to have some snow that evening, and the clock of works had cleaned off the taxiways and like that. But Colonel Johnson wanted to know why I didn't have somebody out there cleaning off the snow that was packed in front of the dispersals area. And he chewed me out for quite a while, and I told him I didn't have anybody that could do that. So I don't know how it ever got down. I think a B-24 could have gone over that little hump of snow, but that was one of the worst chew-outs that I've ever had. One other thing that's of interest is that in 1957, I was assigned over to Incirlik, Turkey, and we were flying 3 different types of, well, I guess I'd call them intelligence types aircraft over there. We had the 130s came out of France, and they would fly along the Russian border there. We also had the U-2s. And the third one was a SAC-47 group that rotated their aircraft from Kansas. And lo and behold, halfway through my tour over there, Colonel Lowell shows up on the base, and so I look him up, and he's the same Colonel Lowell that we had in the 576. What I'm getting at is in my total 26 years in the service, he's the only guy that I ever remember from the old air crews running into while I was in the service. There's one other point I'd like to bring out. It was mentioned yesterday about this great bike race. Having been up there in the tower, having a Jeep, I had a Jeep to run around there, and I ran around the tower, the taxiways and the runways many times to make sure that there wasn't something wrong. I even rode that thing many times on my bicycle. And when they announced this bike race, I was sure I could win that. And I was 26 years of age at that time. I was sure I could win that because I knew right where the hills were and all this. So I started out, and I never did see Colonel Gilbert going by me. Well, I've been thinking, and since we have a home back east, and I'm familiar with the New York Marathon. I think it was 2 years ago, there was some girl was the proclaimed winner of the marathon. Well, what she did, she got on the subway, went around where the race was coming, and then she ran from there. Now, I'm just thinking, since Colonel Gilbert never passed me, he might have gotten picked up at a dispersal point, taken around over there by the 579th area, and was let out. I don't know. I'm just thinking. Thank you.
I inspectors, and we're going to have a new election next November.
Well, that's typical of things that happen in Congress, you know. If you don't support something, we cut out the funds.
Keith?
I'd like to...
Stand up, Keith. Keith Roberts?
Keith Roberts, 578. I'd like to ask Ernie, how did you keep those line checks, Ernie?
Sparkling. Yeah, sparkling.
Well, I think we get by with it now. We use the old oil we drained out the engines, and then we thinned it out a little bit with 100-octane gasoline. We had a 30-gallon drum with holes towards the bottom, and the bottom was sand and a few bricks in it. And then the hose dropped in the top, and it kept a fire burning in there all the time. And our pipe went out through our little fireplace and up the chimney. And we'd always get a report when there was an inspector coming around. And that was fun, putting those fires out and hiding all that before they got there.
Stanley Cyborg, 577.
Hooray! That's what I was going to say. I haven't heard a name 577 with all these comments. I'm from the 577, and I'd like to thank the parachute because they opened up at 2,000 feet. And lucky that they did. And furthermore, as a crew chief, I used to go around with the, flight engineer with the crew chief and count holes. The last time I counted was 67, and the plane was repaired. They were very good. And only one experience I had in which I almost died was when before taking off, you would drain the 2 glass valves, and the gasoline would fall down. I had a young waist gunner ask permission to sit in front and to take off. Of course, he was smoking. He took his last puff and tapped it between the 2 gauges. I almost fainted. Since then, nobody smoked on that plane.
Never smoked until you wear it. Colonel Polking, 578.
I'd like to ask a technical question, and I think it's rather important because it brings out the ingenuity of the ground personnel on our base, and particularly the people like Ernie Barber. We had problems with the airplanes that came over. They weren't completely combat ready. And I'm thinking about the blowing out of the induction couplings, the rubber induction couplings. When you get to altitude at high manifold pressure, sometimes they blow out. And the problem is solved right there on the spot by simply putting one inside of another. The airplanes were never grounded. We didn't go back to the States. It was reported back to the States. But the modifications eventually were made, but we solved the problem right there. The bombing through the bomb bay doors, or the interrupters being taken out. We didn't want to come back with a load of bombs. So finally, it was decided if the bomb bay doors wouldn't open, which had an automatic system that kept the bombs from being released, excuse me, we just dropped the bombs through the bomb bay doors. And there are probably a bunch of other ones you can think of. But a lot of those things were developed right on the flight line by the ground personnel, the engineering personnel that took care of the airplanes, who all did a magnificent job.
Barney, I could add something to you about the Colonel Johnson incident, is that you were not the only one that got chewed out by Colonel Johnson. Anybody want to hold up their hands? I expect that on the occasion of the snow not being cleared off the runway, the reason why you spun because he couldn't find me.
I have a vouch for those.
Your name, please, sir?
Cop, 577. Randy was talking about his oil-fired stove he had in his hut out there. We had one in the 577. The trouble is, it went fine until somebody by the name of Frank Gonsis, decided that maybe he could put the CO2 bottle out of the Mae West in that stove while it was burning. We were all sitting around, and boom! You never see so many pieces of pipe come flying down the whole length of that Gonsis. But it took us a hell long time to get it back up there.
Colonel Gilbert?
May I ask a technical question from former board member Glenn?
Yes, sir.
What do you remember of the use or the practicality of the instrument landing system we had there at Wendling? How much was it actually used in real time, if ever? The ILS system.
I don't recall of ever having anybody report to me of what the use of it. I think the use of flares was about the best thing that ever accumulated over there. Speaking of those instrument landing systems, later on in the Pentagon, that when they improved the ILS systems, they still had to go through the same vigorous things, I guess, like they had to be dropped from so many 100 feet and still work when they arrived. They had to work at in Alaska or up in Greenland or down in the hottest tropical areas. And the funny thing is, these were fixed installations. They were installed at, like, say, at Andrews Air Force Base, and they were never going to get moved. But that's the sum of the cost of all this equipment that we're procuring has to go through these kind of tests. But I got to protect my, being on the board of directors, I got to report an incident that happened over there. I never got court-martialed for it, never got called down for it. Our operations officer over there knew about it. I was never rated in the Air Corps, but I did fly right seat an awful lot, especially with the 576, and I enjoyed it. I could land the B-24, couldn't land the C-47 very well, but Colonel Gibble never got after me about it, so
Never knew.
no, I think he knew. I flew an awful lot with Colonel Lowell, a guy by the name of Ford. He wasn't the best of pilots. Colonel Level, and I don't know if I ever flew with Myron or not. I can't remember. Thank you.
Question back here.
Ray Johnson, 576th. I have a little tale that may be of interest to a lot of the members here. I was playing golf in Bakersfield, California a few years ago, walking down the fairway with a member of the foursome, and his name was Gordon Johnson. And we started talking about World War II and what I did, and I flew a B-24, and he said, "What group were you in?" And I said, "The 392nd. He said, "Do you know Loren Johnson?" And I said, "Yes, he was my group commander." He said, "Well, Loren was my brother." Loren crashed in 1952 on a mountain somewhere near Salt Lake City, Utah. And while I'm standing, let me pay tribute to the ground crews. I arrived as a replacement crew in July of '44. We flew 35 missions without an abort and landed 35 times with all 4 props turning.
John Collin, 579th. I would wonder if Barney could give us a little explanation of how he instructed the gliders that came in to taxi around the strip.
I really don't remember that. We did, I don't know, I remember we had a Mosquito there. Was there for a while. We had some Lancasters, of course, they had 17s, but
Yes, sir, we have one.
Well, that's something I forgot.
Sir.
Adrian Strosky, a navigator in 579 from Tom Jordan's crew. And on one mission, we did come in with absolutely no gas left. Steve, our engineer, was sweating it out as he did all the missions. We came in, and the field, as we were coming in, the final approach, they were shooting, I believe, red flares to tell us that the field was closed and that we should divert whatever kind of flares they used. And Jordan just says, we don't have any gas, and he went on in and landed, and we didn't see the ground until just before the wheels touched. I mean, there was no visibility at all. And we get to right at the end of that runway, and as a matter of fact, we never made it back to our parking spot because we ran out of gas going at the other end of the runway.
I was driving pretty close.
We didn't have room to divert.
I'm Clyde Smith with the 576 Squadron. And I'm really happy to be here because on page 24 in Victor's book, it says that Neff was my pilot, that we blew up on the bomb run. We didn't blow up on the bomb run because we're here.
Well, we all said it was trial and error. Everybody in the room who happen to be non-rated ground personnel, would you please stand? Ground personnel.
Don't be afraid to stand up.
Just identify yourself for
Guy Spinelli, 578 Squadron. Guy Spinelli, 578 Squadron. I was with the armament section, and like Ernie said, we'd get up pretty early and go out there and get the bomb racks ready. And then the ordnance would come with the bombs, and we used to work as a 3 or 4 man crew, loading the bombs. Like Ernie said, we used to get up pretty early in the morning and go eat something, and some pretty good food sometimes. And then we'd go out to the line, to the armament shack, and we'd form little crews, and we'd work different planes to get the releases ready, the shackles ready, and then we had to load the planes. And well, they gave us, what do they call it, a winch to lift the bomb hoist. A bomb hoist to lift these 500-pound bombs up. And what we used to do, we had one man in the tail of the bomb and one man in the front. And we got the plug, we had a pipe welded onto the plug so that we could screw it into the front of the bomb. And I don't know if you remember Gibson, Harry Stockman. You remember Arthur Gibson?
Yeah.
Harry Stockman. Yeah. Well, we'd have a team. And so ordnance would bring out the bombs, we'd put the plug in the front, and we'd roll them up to the bomb bay. We would have the shackles ready and everything. And of course the releases would be already set. And one would get at the front of the bomb and the other one on the tail, and one in the middle of the bomb, and use his back to lift it up. So the 3 of us would lift it up, and someone would go on the catwalk there and hook the bomb onto the shackle. Well, we did pretty good work, and I don't remember anybody having any back troubles in those days. But we used to get through pretty fast, you know. And then I remember, I think there was a couple of missions that you fellas flew that we had to put temporary temporary set of shackles there in the front of the plane to carry these 2,000-pound bonds. And it was quite a bit of work, but we got it done. And I think, honestly, we did a hell of a job, you know, because those, you know, and like Rudy says too, when I was in Alamogordo, I got to know a few of the crews that you supplied, that 982. Then we went across, and it wasn't long, you know, before things started to happen over there. And for a while there, I didn't know anybody, you know. And so, like Ernie said, you know, we really didn't get too close to the crews anymore, you know. And it was a different job over there. And but like Ernie says, we were always on the lookout for the planes that came back, you know. Some made it, some didn't. We were with you anyway, and that's all I want to say.
As soon as we got over there, we threw the book away.
Do you want the floor, Bertie?
Well, I might make a comment.
Identify yourself, Bertie. Hardly anybody knows who you are.
I'm Bertie Schmidt-Larrick. I was the Aero Club director, and it occurred to me that a lot of women in this room might not know what we did, and surprisingly enough, a lot of the officers, the flying officers, didn't know exactly. Their only contact with us was serving the returning missions down on the line, which was fine, which is what we were supposed to do, be there. We served, since they had been without food, sometimes for 8 hours, and before going into interrogation, a little sustenance helped. So we had sandwiches and coffee and hot chocolate made from the powdered milk and the chocolate over there. We had a staff of about 30 English people in the Red Cross Club, and I'll describe that in a minute. But the reason that we didn't get to know some of the flying officers so well, other than that, was that it was necessary for us to learn the ground personnel, which we did because we had a club to keep in order. And we made use of ordnance here too by using their old bomb fins to make the basis for ashtrays in the club. This is where I put the word scrounge in my vocabulary. And that's the kind of thing that we did. So we were there primarily, according to Red Cross directive, for the enlisted men on the base, and there were about 2,000 of those, compared to about 1,000 of the flying or the other officers. So it was felt they had an officers club, therefore the Red Cross was there primarily for the enlisted men. Well, that was fine. And what we did, what we had in the Red Cross building was a Nissen hut construction. The snack bar, the most important place of all, and there the English women produced the sandwiches and the coffee and this kind of thing that we sold. Now we sold things at the request of General Eisenhower. We charged a penny for a cup of coffee, and a penny was equal to 2 American cents at the time. But our boys were pretty well paid in comparison to others, and one explanation given to us was they wanted to help some of that money that might be burning a hole in their pockets. There was some place to put it. Of course, never was there a charge down on the line or places like that in serving a returning mission or under battlefield conditions as there was after I got onto the continent. But that's why, and when we found we might be making some money after all that, we had a free night a month. So we did not make any money, but the snack bar was important. The game room, which was a card room, we could conduct our bingo games there, and to scrounge from the local countryside, fresh eggs were good prizes. So we had a ping pong room, we conducted tournaments, and for all the bookworms, we had a library and a lounge, and that's how it was used, and we closed the club at night with time, gentlemen, and that kind of warning that you would normally get. So if that helped for an explanation of what we were there for the lives of some of these people who didn't know, and for the others who didn't, well, I hope it did. Remembering some of the strange incidents that occurred the night that Winifred Small and I arrived was the night, I think, I don't know if Myron Kyleman's back in the room or not, they said the bomb dump was blowing up. Well, that was the 12th of December of 1943, and we had no billets, so they put us up in the hospital. And here all these doctors went stumbling out of the hospital in the dark and with a few choice words about, where's my flashlight? And they didn't know what was going on. We didn't either, so we just stayed in and pulled the covers up over our heads. And that was my introduction to Wendling. The time when firearms were issued on the base was a nightmare in the Red Cross Club. I don't know who thought who was coming, but those 45s were issued, and then they also had some rifles, I believe, and they had to carry them. We had no place to put them. We couldn't check them. They came in, and if you know what it's like with a square table and 4 seats around the table like we had in the snack bar, and these guys would hang those rifles back up on those things, and then to have people try and walk through there, well, one person did get shot. One night, they were flipping a 45 around, you know, so that it would hit in an empty spot. Well, it didn't. And this one GI got shot. I heard it, and I went and called the ambulance immediately. Well, thankfully, he still is, he lived. His lung was punctured, and so he lost part of that. But the other embarrassing thing was when they thought people were coming to infiltrate. And here comes this GI to the kitchen door. Now, this is no way you get into the Red Cross Club, you know, where the regular door is. And on top of that, he had a German accent. Well, so I called S2. And they came down, and well, my face was red. The guy really belonged there, but he was new and didn't know his way around. And what was I to think? So, those were some of the things that went on, and I just thought you all might like to know how this started. Was Ernie's comment about not getting too close to people. When Freddie and I first came, she had experience at Hardwick, and that's what they did. They put the new people with people who had experience. And she said, it's best not to get too close to some of the flying personnel, because you just can't take it after a while. So sometimes in retrospect I think, well, now that wasn't exactly right, maybe we should have. But we needed to know the ground personnel in order to operate and be there, of course, for the enlisted men. Yeah.
Bertie, one question, those bomb tail fins, were they new or used?
Oh, we said, the used ones, please don't throw them away. Throw them in our direction. And then they made them for us, which is pretty nice. So we had wonderful cooperation. And you know, you had to depend upon transportation to get that food down there on the line. And Jim Gore, of course, always came through. And we had just absolutely the best cooperation.
He always does. How much do you have to feed him?
Speaking of this syndrome of air crews, not being too familiar with air crews, that was not only vis-a-vis ground and air crew. In my position as a newsletter editor, I talked to lots of people in this group. And that also followed too with the air crews. The air crews really, I had one man tell me, that he wouldn't even go to the NCO club. He'd get on his bicycle and ride out through the country because he knew that the guy he got chummy with might not be there the next day. But that's all behind us now, and now that we can remember each other, and isn't it great that the good Lord has supplied us with a psychological mechanism that we can't remember the bad times, we only remember the good times. Arnold Dovey.
Well, listen, the birdie, but maybe not. Did you have anything to do with the debriefing booze? Where did that come into it?
Well, the only thing I had to do with it was to pass it out. I don't know where it came from, and I didn't question that.
You know, the Red Cross is very heavily infiltrated with Methodists.
Was issued by Dr. Holland.
That's right.
It came out of the hospital. Now, the booze was probably a good thing, but I think I saw some very bad things from it too. The bennies, benzodrine sulfates, were issued by the flight surgeon. And I don't know if you all know what bennies are, but they keep you awake, and they're also abused. If you have a combination of too many bennies on a long mission, and you have 2 or 3 ounces of alcohol after you land, you've got a disaster on your hands. And there were plenty of them happen. I just thought I'd follow through on that.
Yeah, good, I'm glad you did. I didn't know it. I just remember, and Carol Cheek reminded me, one time when he came back and one of his men was all shot up and they were afraid he was going to lose his eyesight. He had glass in his eyes. And he was standing around there at the back, 1 foot on the other, and Don Clark, who was the chaplain, handed me a shot, and he said, "Here, give it to him." So I did, and that was why, but no, that wasn't in our bailiwick, except as the occasion arose there.
It is now 12 o'clock, and as Colonel Paddock, identify yourself, Patty.
Ken Paddock, Cape Gordon Squadron, Group Navigator. In the last 48 years, I have been in possession of almost all of the pictures of the navigators of the 392nd. And if there's anyone here who would like to see that I have your picture, I would be more than glad to give it to you.
I think probably it being 12 o'clock, as the old pub keeper used to say, time gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Rugged and ready crew, and you can